Continuing where I left off, Chapter 10. "Does it ever happen to you," said Natasha to her brother when they were settled in the sitting room, "do you ever feel as if nothing will happen? Nothing. That everything good is past. And you feel not so much bored as sad?" "I should think so," he replied. "It happened to me at times when everything is all right and everyone is cheerful, and all of a sudden it strikes me that I'm sick of it all, and that we all must die. Once in the regiment, when I had not gone to some gala affair, and the music was playing, and suddenly I felt so depressed." "Oh yes, I know that feeling. I know," Natasha broke in. "Even when I was quite little that used to happen to me. Do you remember that time I was punished on account of the plums, and you were all dancing, and I sat in the schoolroom sobbing? I cried so hard I shall never forget it. I felt sad and sorry for everyone, for myself, and for everyone in the world. And the worst part was that I hadn't done anything," said Natasha. "Do you remember?" "I remember," said Nikolai. "I remember that I came to you afterward and wanted to comfort you, but did you know I was ashamed to? We were awfully funny. I had a little wooden doll then, and I wanted to give it to you. Do you remember?" "And do you remember," asked Natasha with a pensive smile, "how once long, long ago, when we were quite little, Uncle called us into the study that was in the old house, and it was dark. We went in, and suddenly there before us stood a Negro," Nikolai finished for her with a smile of delight. "Of course I remember. To this day I don't know whether there really was a Negro, or whether we dreamed it, or were only told about it. He had gray hair, remember, and white teeth, and he stood staring at us." "Do you remember, Sonia?" asked Nikolai. Yes, I remember something about it," Sonia answered shyly. "You know, I've asked Papa and Mama about that Negro," said Natasha. "They say there wasn't any Negro at all. But, you see, you remember him." "Of course I do. I remember his teeth as if I had only just seen them." "How strange it is, as if it were a dream. I like that. And do you remember how we were rolling eggs in the ballroom, and suddenly two old women began whirling round and round on the carpet? Was that real or not? Do you remember what fun it was? And yes, and do you remember how Papa in his blue overcoat fired off a gun in the porch?" Smiling with pleasure, they turned over their memories. Not the melancholy reminiscences of the old, but the poetic recollections of youth, those impressions of their remotest past in which dreams blend with reality, and they laughed with quiet enjoyment. Sonia, as always, lagged behind the other two. Though they shared the same memories, much of what they recalled she had forgotten, and what did come back to her failed to awaken the same poetic feeling they experienced. She simply enjoyed their pleasure and tried to stimulate it. She could fully participate only when they began to speak of her arrival in their home. Sonia told them how afraid she had been of Nikolai because he had cording on his jacket, and the nurse had told her that the two would be sewn up with cords. "And I remember they told me that you had been born under a cabbage," said Natasha, "and I remember not daring to disbelieve them, though I knew it wasn't true, and it made me so uncomfortable." While they were talking, a maid looked in at the back door of the sitting room. "They have brought the cook. Miss," she said in a whisper. "I don't want it now, Pola. Tell them to take it away," said Natasha. During their conversation, Dimmler had come into the sitting room, going up to the harp that stood in the corner. He took off his cloth cover, and the harp gave out a jangling sound. "Edward College, please play my favorite nocturne by Field," came the old countess's voice from the drawing room. Dimmler struck a chord, and turning to Natasha, Nikolai, and Sonia said, "How quiet you young people are." "Yes, we're philosophizing," said Natasha, looking up for a moment, and then continuing the conversation. They were discussing dreams. Dimmler began to play. Natasha noisily tiptoed to the table, picked up the candle, and carried it out, then returned to her place and quietly sat down again. It was dark in the room, especially where they were sitting on the sofa, but the silvery light of the full moon came through the big windows and fell on the floor. "Do you know," said Natasha in a whisper, moving closer to Nikolai and Sonia, while Dimmler, who had finished the piece, still sat softly, running his fingers over the strings, apparently uncertain whether to stop or to play something more. Pardon me. "Do you know, I think that when one goes on and on recalling memories, in the end one begins to remember what happened before one was in the world." "That's metempsychosis," said Sonia, who had been a good student and always remembered what she learned. "The Egyptians believed that our souls once inhabit the bodies of animals and will go back into them again." "No, I don't believe we were ever in animals," said Natasha, still whispering, though the music had ceased. "But I know for certain that we were angels somewhere out there and had been here, and that's why we remember everything." "May I join you?" asked Dimmler, who had quietly come and sat down by them. "If we had been angels, then why should we have fallen lower?" said Nikolai. "No, that can't be." "Not lower. Whoever told you we were lower?" "Whoever told you we were lower?" "How do I know what I was before?" rejoined Natasha with conviction. "The soul is immortal, you know. So if I am to live forever, I must live for a whole eternity. "Yes, but it's hard for us to imagine eternity," remarked Dimmler, who had joined the young folk with a somewhat condescending smile, but now spoke as quietly and seriously as they. "Why is it hard to imagine eternity?" asked Natasha. "There's today, there will be tomorrow and forever, and there was yesterday and the day before." "Natasha, now it's your turn. Sing me something," they heard the countess say. "Why are you sitting there like conspirators?" "Mamma, I don't feel a bit like it," said Natasha, but she got up all the same. None of them, not even the middle-aged Dimmler, wanted to break off the conversation and leave that corner of the sitting room, but Natasha rose to her feet and Nikolai seated himself at the clavichord. Standing as usual in the middle of the ballroom and choosing the place where the Renaissance was best, Natasha began to sing her mother's favorite song. She had said she did not feel like singing, but it was long since she had sung, and long before she sat again as she did that evening. Count Ilid Adrich heard from her from his study, where he was talking to Metenka, and like a schoolboy in haste to finish his lessons and run out to play, he muddled the orders of his steward, and at last stopped speaking. Metenka, standing before him, also listened and smiled. Nikolai did not take his eyes off his sister and drew breath in time with her. Sonia, as she listened, thought what a difference there was between herself and her friend, and how impossible it was for her to be anywhere near as fascinating as her cousin. The old countess sat with a blissful yet sad smile on her face and tears in her eyes, now and then shaking her head. She was thinking both of Natasha and her own youth, and how there was something terrible and unnatural in this prospective marriage of Natasha to Prince Andrei. Dimmler, who had seated himself before the countess, listened with closed eyes. "Ah, Countess," he said at last, "that is a European talent. She has nothing to learn. That tenderness, sweetness, power. Oh, how afraid am I for her, how afraid I am," the countess, not realizing to whom she was speaking. Her maternal instinct told her that there was too much of something in Natasha, and that because of it she would not be happy. Before Natasha had finished singing, 14-year-old Petya rushed into the room in great excitement to announce that someone mummers has arrived. Had arrived. Natasha stopped abruptly. "Idiot!" she screamed at her brother, and running to a chair, she flung herself into it and broke into such violent sobbing that it was a long while before she could stop. "It's nothing, Mamma, really it's nothing. Only Petya startled me," she said, trying to smile, but her tears continued to flow, and she was choked by sobs. The mummers, house serfs dressed up as bears, Turks, taverners, and fine ladies, formidable and comic figures, bringing with them a feeling of gaiety and the cold from outside, at first huddled bashfully in the afternoon, in the anteroom. Then, hiding behind one another, they pushed into the ballroom, where, constrained at first, and then with increasing liveliness and merriment, they commenced singing, dancing, and playing Christmas games. The Countess, after identifying them and laughing at their costumes, went back to the drawing room. The Count, with a beaming smile on his face, sat down in the ballroom and praised the players. The young people had disappeared. Half an hour later there appeared among the other mummers in the ballroom an old lady in a farthingale. This was Nikolai. Petya was a Turkish girl, Dimmler a clown, Natasha a hussar, and Sonia a Circassian with burnt cork eyebrows and mustache. After being received well-infringed mystification, surprise, and admiration by those who were not dressed up, the young people decided that their costumes were so good that they must now show them elsewhere. Nikolai, who wanted to go out into his troika, the roads being in such splendid condition, proposed that they should take with them a dozen of the house serfs who were dressed up and drive to Uncle's. Madame Melyukova was a widow who lived about 4 versts from the Rostovs with a family of children of all ages and their tutors and governesses. "That, Masheya, is a good idea," chimed in an old count with alacrity. "I'll dress up at once and go with them. See if I don't make Peshash open her eyes." But the countess would not agree to his going. His leg had been bad for several days. It was decided that the count must not go, but that if Luseva Ivanovna, Madame Schoss, would accompany them, the young ladies might visit the Milovyovs. Sonia, generally so reticent and timid, was more importunate than all others in appealing to Madame Schoss not to refuse. Sonia's costume was the best of all. Her mustache and eyebrows were remarkably becoming to her. Everyone told her how pretty she looked, and she was in a spirited, energetic mood, not unusual with her. Some inner voice told her that now or never her fate would be decided, and in her masculine attire she seemed a quite different person. Luiska Ivanovna consented to go, and half an hour later 4 troikas, where sleigh bells and harness bells jingling, the sledge runners squeaking and whizzing over the snow, drove up to the porch. Natasha was the first to set the tone of the holiday gaiety, and this gaiety spread from one to another, grew wilder and wilder, reaching its climax when they all came out into the frosty air and got into the sledges, talking, calling to one another, laughing and shouting. 2 of the troikas were the household sledges. The third was the old count's, with a trotter from the olive stud as wheel horse, and the 4th, Nikolai's own, with his short, shaggy black wheeler. Nikolai, in his old lady dress over which he had belted his hussar's cloak, stood in the middle of the sled, reins in hand. It was so light that he could see the moonlight reflected in the metal of the harness, and in the eyes of the startled horses as they looked around at the noisy party assembled in the shadow of porch roof. Natasha, Sonia, Madame Schoss, and 2 maids got into Nikolai's sled. Dimmler's wife and Petler got into the count. The rest of the mummers seated themselves in the other 2 sleds. "Go ahead," Zakhar shouted Nikolai to his father's coachman, so as to have the chance of racing past him on the road. The Count's troika was Dimmler, and the others of his party started off, its runners squeaking as if they were frozen to the snow, its deep-toned bell clanging. The traced horse, pressed close to the shafts and sticking to the snow, kicked it up hard and glittering as sugar. Nikolai, set off after the first troika. The other two noisily followed, their runners whining. At first they went at the moderate trot along the narrow road. As they drove by, the guard of the shadows cast by the bare trees fell across the road, obscuring the bright moonlight. But as soon as they had passed the fence, they stood, snowy plain, and bathed in the radiance of the moon, sparkling like diamonds and with a bluish sheen, opened out before them. And I'm going to leave it off there. I want to thank you guys so much for continuing to watch the series. I know it's been 2 years since I've continuing reading War and Peace, but I'm going to continue to try to read it, and I have a new camera. So I'll see you give it a thumbs up, leave a comment below, please subscribe to more if you want to see more of me reading War and Peace, and I'll see you in the next episode. Okay guys, bye.